What up, though? Today is Sunday, October 19th, 2025, and I am Dwayne Barnes, MPA, and we're coming back for week 8. Yeah, that's 8. I think that's 8 of AAS 477, Black Power, the fight for Black liberation. This week, our topic is the economics of Black liberation. I want to have a very insightful discussion this week around the economics of Black liberation, which starts with a very let me take a step back. This conversation that we're going to have this week is a very multifaceted conversation in that we as Black folks are not a monolith, and we've never been a monolith. So when we think about the plight of our people and our economic plight, it's not just one kind of a entity or one kind of philosophy that feeds the beast, so to speak, or that works for everybody. So what I want to do this week is kind of do a couple things. One, take a step back into my Jim Crow class and really kind of look at the history of Black economics through that lens, a little bit of the civil rights class, if you think about some of the economics, and then talk about it more through the lens of Black power. So we're going to get, if you missed it from 2 classes ago, we're going to talk a bit about it through that perspective in the early years, post-slavery, and then through civil rights, and then through modern times. And modern times for this class is the 70s. So can't wait to get into that. But before I go any further, I want to do a couple of things. One, give a shout out to the Gordy label here, Black Forum. That was a label that Motown founded in 1970 to give a ear and a output to those who have political perspective. So if you go back, you'll see Dr. King had an album on Black Forum, Stokely Carmichael, Langston Hughes, etc. So it was a big push during that time, especially after the success of what's going on with Marvin Gaye and the change in time. So shout out to the Black Forum label, Motown. I'm always going to represent for Motown. And it also had to represent on my, I guess you can't see it now, my J-Mo jersey. I mean, my Gibbs jersey. Gibbs is one of my favorite players on the team. And I want to, cop this jersey. I want to give a special shout out to our Lions, especially the young men who are out there doing their thing. And then finally, before we get started, want to give a salute and a shout out to Michael D'Angelo Archer, Mr. D'Angelo, who passed this week. And it's been very different for me. I hadn't said a lot online. I just played a couple of videos and kind of gave a shout out. But one of my favorite artists, not just, I mean, from the time I heard Brown Sugar all the way into the Black Messiah, any live performance we could find, any demo we could find, any live concert online that we could find, any video. He's always been one of my favorites. So to hear him go was tough. And I just want to thank him for what he did give us as far as the music, Black music, unapologetic music, music that has changed a generation. And I ain't talking neo soul. I'm just talking about Black music in general. So next week, we'll be talking more about music, Black music. And so we'll get into that as we get there. But I had to give a shout out to the Black Forum label behind me. Man Gibbs as he gets ready for another game, and D'Angelo as he passed. So let's get going here. If you're with me, be sure to like, share, subscribe to the YouTube page. Drop a 1 in the chat. Let me know that you're here and we're ready to roll. So just a quick introduction. This is week 8. So if you ain't heard it by now, you know what I'm saying, you ain't getting the full thing. You're getting the small version of it. AAS 477, Introduction to Black Power, or Black Power, is my 3rd class in the series. I started early this year with the AAS 477, Economics of Jim Crow. We went from Reconstruction all the way to 1954, specifically looking at the contributions of W.E.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, and Booker T. Washington, their economic thought as it played through the history during that time. My last class, that was 5 classes. My last class, which was 10 classes total, was AAS 477, Power and Protest, where we talked about civil rights from 1955 all the way till 1968 when Dr. King was assassinated, and kind of went through the civil rights struggle, the biggest marches, protests, laws passed, people involved, etc. And then now this class, we're on week number 8, really 9, because we started with week 0 to kind of get you caught up, is AAS 477, Black Power. where we are looking at the fight for Black liberation through the late 60s and all the way into 1980, primarily focusing on the Black Panther Party as our center kind of organization and the work that went on with them, how the government kind of took them down through COINTELPRO, through the Black arts movement of the 70s. We talked about the image in Black film last week. So all these different things. And then next week, we'll be talking about music, and then we'll bring it home, wrapping up what happened with the Panthers and the Black Power movement, specifically around the church committee and how COINTELPRO was found to do all these things to kind of undergird Black liberation. So this week, we're focusing on economics, and I definitely want to have this conversation. I think it's a very important conversation to have, and I want to jump into it. So without further ado, I want to pull these over here. Now, if you were with me last week, I did want to mention this. If you were with me last week, I played some content. I usually play, if you've been with me every week, I play a video to kind of sum up what I'm talking about. But I guess I played some copyrighted material, and it stopped my stream midway through. So if you are a part of the email list, you got both links. But if not, you only have the second half of that conversation because the first half YouTube took down. So that was on the image in Black media, looking at Blaxploitation film, the history of Black images in media. So going from minstrel shows all the way up until the 70s of Blaxploitation films and Black sitcoms during the 70s, and really honing down on the history and the context behind that. So if you want to get that, hit me up. You can get the second part. My screen is black. Uh-oh. Let me see what's going on. Because I can see myself, but I can't see. I guess you guys can't see me. Hold on. Let me try something here. Hopefully, this happened last time when they took the stream down. So hopefully, the powers that be ain't got me strapped up. Give me 1 second here. Bear with me as I figure out what's going on, because I can see myself, but you guys can't see me. Can you hear me? Okay, I'm gonna try this. If I disconnect my camera, I may be able to just use my laptop camera. Give me just a second here. I'm gonna check on my screen here too. Yeah, my screen is black and I have no idea why. Testing 1 2 1 2. So you can't hear me. My screen is just black. Let me try this. All right, I switched cameras. Let me see if that's gonna help at all in my plight here. Okay, all right, so that works. This camera, let me go back to my other one. Thank you for holding with me through these technical difficulties. We love technology when it works, and when it don't, we have a problem with it. So let me see what I got here. Okay. All right, I think we good. I think we up. I think we going. I think we good here. Okay. All right. Man, ever since last week, I've been getting some kind of weird kind of thing going on. So thank you for your flexibility. Let's jump in. And if we have any problems moving forward, we'll fix it as we go. All right. So let's go back into grounding this conversation a little bit. So Black labor in America. It's always been a very kind of interesting things. When I think about it, I think about it in three kind of forms: labor, just the full output of what we've been able to do while we've been here, from the slave, from picking cotton to all those things, all the way to streaming online today. And then think about entrepreneurship; those who were fortunate enough or through necessity found a way to navigate through independent economic opportunities, and then the policy that either promoted or restricted our movement as far as earning a living, creating livings for others, and generating products. So when I'm talking about that, I'm kind of looking at it through that lens. Also really want to take a time to really highlight, the economic ideologies of Black power. Some saw the capitalist system as the way to go, as we'll see as we look through our history. Some look for alternative forms of economics. So you saw cooperative economics. That was really a nationalist kind of perspective. Economic nationalism, we see that with Garvey, we saw it with Malcolm X, we saw it with Black Power through the Panthers, etc. Communism, socialism, African-centered economics. So we've always seen alternative lenses of what economics could bring. Because some people say, well, look, capitalism got us in this mess. It ain't never going to profit us. And I don't know how we're going to move forward through it. We need something different. While others were saying, fuck that. Capitalism works. I'm going to be a part of it and I'm going to build my wealth and I'm going to be one of them. So, everything in those lines. So policies along the way, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. We talking about executive orders. We're talking about affirmative action opportunities that allow for our economic generating opportunities to be enhanced. So we think about it through that lens. Those are a couple lenses that we're going to look at it through. And so to do that today, I want to, I think I want to, well, I'll go back. Let's set the table as well. So today we're going to be talking about economic frameworks, historical context. We're going to look at some Black business titans and some economic ideologies that fit into what we're talking about as far as economics and Black power. This part is essential to kind of grounding our conversation. So like I said, we think about labor, we think about entrepreneurship, integration, policy, all these things kind of come together in this nexus to build out this discussion we're having around economics. It's a very nuanced conversation. If you, I guess you weren't able to see last week, I took a different approach to really kind of take a step back and define the topic a lot more thorough than I had before. So today we'll be doing a similar thing. So let's go to our Black power defined for this discussion. So each week I do a segment called Black Power Defined. And the reason why I do the Black Power Defined is the Black Power Defined portion of the course is my goal is not to tell you what Black power is or not to influence you to have my belief of what Black power is. It's been to showcase the many different perspectives that encompasses the Black power ideology and allow for you to choose where you stand in that. We started with looking at a summary of those who had a Black power philosophy, from abolitionist Frederick Douglass to Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Booker T. Washington, Dr. King, Malcolm X. We talked about Huey P. Newton. We talked about Stokely Carmichael. We talked about Larry Neal from the Black Arts Movement. This week we're talking about Earl Graves, and we're going to be talking about Earl Hutchinson, who wrote a really interesting book called The Myth of Black Capitalism. But let's talk about Earl Graves here. If you know anything about Earl Graves, he was the founder of Black Enterprise magazine, among other things. He, was a graduate of Morgan State. He was a member of Omega Psi Phi. He had the opportunity to serve as a staff member in Senator, I believe it was Kennedy's office. He got affiliated with the Small Business Association, and started his entrepreneurial journey in undergrad, and somebody who really was able to buy into the system and have the system buy into him. One of his two of his major accomplishments, or a couple of his major accomplishments was, one, starting Black Enterprise magazine in 1970. Two, he and Magic Johnson went in to buy Pepsi distributing plant, which they later sold back for profit. And so he's been able to sit on corporate boards. So he kind of was an example of those who believed in the capitalism ideology and how it moved forward. Somebody who really had a chance to buy into society. One second. I never, all day I don't sneeze. When I get on here, I start sneezing every 5 seconds. I wonder what it is. But let's talk a little bit about the perspective of Earl Graves as we think about Black power defined. Again, today we're talking about economics, so we're going to have a couple of different economic perspectives to look at as we move forward. So, His perspective economically was centered on the conviction that economic empowerment can be achieved through entrepreneurship, corporate inclusion, financial literacy, and that was the cornerstone of true liberation for Black communities, which isn't something that we hadn't seen in the past. Going all the way back through the history, and we'll do it through here in a moment, we've always been entrepreneurial. We've always tried to buy into the system. The question was always, would those rules still apply to us when we get in on it, or do the rules change? So the idea of entrepreneurship has never been foreign to African Americans or Africans in America through slavery, through Jim Crow, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something that we all have to a certain extent bought into. He also believed in building legacies. He believed that entrepreneurship was more than just starting a business. It was about building sustainable legacies for families and communities, creating an ecosystem. Through Black Enterprise Magazine and other ventures, Graves built an entire support system of information, advocacy, and networking to help Black entrepreneurs thrive, which is something that I think, I won't say that, I'll just move forward in this ideology, and we'll keep moving forward. He also believed in equal opportunity, not charity, and we'll come back to that as we move forward too. Graves advocated for equal opportunity, not special treatment, stating in How to Succeed in Business Without Being White that the Black community wanted to do business and have the opportunity to earn success, he championed Black inclusion in the corporate America, serving on boards, advocating for major corporations to do business with Black-owned businesses. So one thing about Graves, I will say, is that through that Black Enterprise Magazine and his ability to navigate, he really came through at a time where, as times were changing, he, tried his best to look out for those in his tribe who had the same ideology, who had the same kind of thing going. He also believed in the interconnectivity of power. He believed that economic, political, and social power were interconnected, viewing financial resources as an essential means for driving change. We're going to start to talk about some of these philosophies and how do they align up with some of the other ones in our past. His aim was to empower African Americans to thrive professionally, economically, and proactively empowered citizens. So he wanted to see his folks, actively engage in society and reap the benefits. Also believing in financial literacy and discipline. Black Enterprise provided practical guidance on wealth building, saving, investing, and money management. It's one of the first popular culture magazines to do that, specifically dedicated to our demographic. So he has to have his props for that. And then finally, self-sufficiency and community support. He emphasized supporting minority-owned businesses through economic strength and community uplift and philanthropy. He stressed that successful business people have a responsibility to create opportunities for others, noting that the selfishness doesn't last. So a very unique perspective, one that we've had in the culture. And I really wanted to bring it to the forefront because, as we've been talking about Black power, we've been seeing in this class specifically, because we haven't really gotten to many, I guess we did earlier, and we talked about Black Arts Movement and some of those things, but a lot of the political revolution was saying, you know what, the system ain't working for us and we need to uproot it. We need to look at another way to do it. And so Earl Graves, on the other hand, said, you know what, I found a way through this system, though it was challenging, and I want to bring that system full through. So he can tell you better than I can. So let's bring up this video, this interview of Earl Graves, talking more about his perspective. And I think this is important as we move forward through the discussion. And I'm going to say, Lord, please allow for this to play and don't get me kicked off because I really want to share this perspective here. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to bring up Earl Graves. We'll watch a couple minutes here.
About Black Enterprise Magazine, when you began it, it's not only a business opportunity, but I keep reading in How to Succeed in Business Without Being White that you wanted it to be a how-to magazine. Why is how-to important?
Well, the whole premise of the magazine is to say to African Americans from the beginning, you too can have a piece of the economic action of this country, right? That the opportunities are there, whether or not you're talking about as a professional going into some line of work, as a person working in another corporation for somebody else, or putting the key in the door yourself every morning and taking that, whether that happens to be and I'm just using that as a reference, but that's true whether or not you're an auto dealer, whether or not you're a florist, whether or not you're a manufacturer or something. Maybe it's a franchisee. I owned the Pepsi franchise once upon a time, and that was a how-to, if you will. It was and I was writing that magazine for the 5 examples or 6 examples I've just given, so that if you were a franchise operator, I was going to be able to tell you something about what you were doing with your employees that would be useful. If you were a person aspiring to be a franchise owner, I was going to tell you how you could be that. Where you do an issue once a year on franchising, where we list the leading opportunities in franchising, 50 leading companies in the franchising area, McDonald's and Wendy's and Burger King and Pepsi Cola, which doesn't make a franchise available, nor Coca-Cola. They're not selling their franchises anymore. They're buying them back, and so that wouldn't be an option. But again, it's a how-to. It is, here's what people want to know. Today, that is most driven by a Black Wealth Initiative. We are saying to people, and I've had a campaign now for the last 2.5 years that says you must save money, you must plan for the future, you must preserve money for your children's graduation, for your children's future. And this Black Wealth Initiative has taken off to the extent that we've probably had on the other side of 100,000 people sign and put in their own refrigerator. That's something they sent back to me, a declaration of financial independence. They want to save, they want to plan for their future. They're not going to let small material things overcome the fact that they want to plan for their security. And so, because in this country, we're a nation of spenders, not savers. And to the extent that you look in terms of the opportunities that the market has offered in the 80s, and now, and of course, it's down, but it'll come back. We need to have more and more people who are recognizing the value of equities and the value of bonds and the value of stocks.
You know, the things you're talking about, you would think are things that everybody just knows. Everybody knows you ought to save money. You shouldn't spend everything you got. You shouldn't go into debt. You ought to put something aside for the future and for your own children. Everybody should know those things. Why don't people know those things?
Because we live in a materialistic society. We want to show people we have the best car. Our kids went to the best school. You can wear the best clothes, right? And it is a matter of wanting to be there. And we're in a society, we wanted everything now. I mean, you and I knew, or at least I did, I can't speak for your growing up, but I mean, I had, when I went off to college, I think 1 sport jacket or 2 sport jackets and 1 suit. And I'm still trying to catch up with how many suits I now need to have because of that kind of thinking. But at least I've been smart enough now to certainly plan for my future. So that my wife and I certainly, unless something dramatic, dire were to happen in this country, and I don't see that happening economically, that we can be comfortable for the rest of our lives. And also we're providing for our kids being comfortable. So it is a matter that we don't save because there's so many other things saying to us spend. And we got this not very important $600 refund that everyone got in this country from because of President Bush's initiative.
So in short, that was exactly, common sense isn't common exactly. But in short, that was an idea, or that was a play on how you get or his philosophy, and which was one, like I said, that we as a community have embraced. Even today, you see a lot of that, Black excellence idea, the idea that, you're going to get rich and make a lot of money and be just like them, whoever them is. However, on the contrary, well, before I get there, let me get my deck back up. Okay. Opportunity. Yep. Again, economic empowerment, political influence, and social transformation being kind of the interconnected economic philosophy as it related to Earl Graves and his perspective. Now, you also had a gentleman who I really thought fit this class very well. I was doing some research, and up until this point, I've never heard of this book until I started doing my research. It was on a list. George Jackson, and we talked about him time before last, as a revolutionary from the Soledad brothers who ended up in prison for allegedly killing a cop. Had a reading list, and on the reading list was this book. And I hope to do a book club around this one, as I do with the other one as well. But let's talk about Earl Orfani Hutchinson and his idea of the myth of Black capitalism. As I mentioned, at the time in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, people were tired of trying to fit a square peg, as they felt, in a round hole. as that relates to trying to be a part of society. They watched Dr. King, they watched the whole civil rights movement, and still weren't satisfied with those results. So people were saying, well, is capitalism the way? Is that the way? Do we need to figure something else out? And as Nixon took over, if you've been following the class, Richard Nixon took over in 1969, and he coined an idea of Black capitalism as a way to solve problems outside of, well, we'll get more to that, but we just noted that. So this was kind of a rebuff to that, and a rebuff to thinking about business being the only thing that can solve your problem. So the central argument of that text is Black capitalism cannot save the oppressed, because capitalism is fundamentally a radicalized system of exploitation that consistently fails to deal with the poverty that's faced by African Americans. He gave an historical reference to say, the creation of capitalism has failed to help the masses. Black businesses remain fragile, mom and pop operations marginalized easily. Buy Black campaigns often reinforce Black bourgeoisie exploitation. Looking at it as domestic colonialism, Black communities suffer from the outflow of consumer dollars. And we'll talk about that as we move forward. Capital not retained, leading to systemic disinvestment patterns in Black businesses. White majority corporations dominate, ensuring that Black areas can remain marginalized. So political diversion from liberation and accountability. It breeds tokenism. The occasional Black CEOs creates an appearance while the masses remain impoverished. And a lot of that has happened during the Black excellence movement. And we can talk more about that in another class. And there needs to be a revolutionary solution. True liberation requires direct assault on both oppression and capitalism. That was this perspective. So, it's such an interesting kind of view of two different perspectives in the same time, to say, hey man, we need to buy into capitalism. That's the Earl Graves perspective, versus this one saying, bruh, maybe we should think about another way. And a lot of revolutionary ideology was leaning this way too. So I'm gonna bring the brother on. I watched the interview he was given 50 years after he wrote the book, to kind of give some credence to what he's talking about. So I'm gonna share my screen here, and we'll look at the it's a bit distorted just a little bit, but it's enough for us to hear it.
On my campus, California State University, we had the second Black student union. Back then, the whole thing was forming Black unions on campuses. San Francisco State was the first. California State University, where I was the second. So we had a radical tradition. So I'm grounded in that, but even more grounded in Marxist ideas. That at that time was starting to gain a lot of credence. And we had study groups, reading some of the classics from Marx, Engels, Lenin, Mao, and of course, Kwame Nkrumah, the African Marxists. So all of these things, they were having an influence. Now, Christopher, what happened? Richard Nixon comes along, President Nixon. And he says, we're going to, and it was pretty clever what he tried to do, we're going to co-opt Black militancy. And the way he did that is Black capitalism. Black capitalism. We're going to create and we're going to build a Black capitalist class. Small business people, entrepreneurs, tradespeople, craftspeople, use them. Capitalism works. Blacks now can be, in fact, major players in the capitalist game. So all of these things coming together, the radical tradition, things I was involved with, the readings, Nixon now putting Black capitalism on the table. And by the way, Christopher, when he did that, that really set off a chain. There was a huge debate. I mean, I can't emphasize enough, huge debate within the African-American communities, and especially the intellectual communities and the business community about Black capitalism. What does it mean? Can it happen? Is there anything to that? Can that really be a reality? One other thing, the NAACP, they were beginning to change. And the Urban League, but especially the NAACP, They were beginning now to pick up on that. Well, hey, maybe the best way is now not the marches, not the protests, the demonstration, but let's build up some black millionaires. Let's build up some big black capitalism and
Oh
black
my
capitalists. And
goodness.
now money, money will solve the problem. That is the path to liberation. Not marching, not protests, not political action, but hey, baby, dollars, dollars, dollars. Becoming wealthy, becoming a player in the capitalist game. Somehow, in the minds of many, and by the way, a lot of people bought into that, saying, "Hey, you
Mhm.
know what? They're right." So I felt I had to debunk that. I had to debunk that by not only looking at the present, but also going back in time and putting a history to it. Black capitalism, Chris, we have to realize it's not new. Nixon coined it as a buzz concept, but we've always going back almost to the beginning. Um, Either in slavery, you always had a free black population, not big,
Mhm.
but you always had free blacks. And you always had, even in the era of the 1850s, the 1860s, you always had, even during slavery, you had some blacks that were business people and tradespeople. So that's not a new concept. Capital, capitalism, business, trading, building assets. And then over time, we've always had a black business class. In the South, even in the height of segregation for 60, 70 years, you had very successful black insurance companies. They called them then Negro insurance companies,
Mhm.
Negro owned banks, Negro owned retail stores. So there's nothing new about that. What was
Mhm.
new about it, Nixon and the rest put black on it. When they put black on it, it made it seem like it was something totally different, revolutionary.
Yeah. So, I think that's a very interesting place to start this discussion, especially around just the black power defined through those two lenses. I think, as always in our culture, everybody is somewhere in between. You got your hardcore capitalist, and you got those who say, that ain't really feeding the bill, or let's do capitalism in a way that's more cooperative. Um, Again, the notion of black capitalism is a fantasy or myth. Future programs for black liberation should not include capitalism in any form. That came from the book. I'll say this: during that time, I think that through their perspective, I can understand where he's coming from, and I think that as we move forward, and as we start to look at how capitalism is impacting us today, maybe we have another view on that. But again, we're not a monolith. We won't think the same thing. I would love to hear your thoughts on that as we move forward. Um, I'm somewhere where a very interesting thing. We think about, and I won't go too far on this. We think about black excellence. It was something that Puff and Jay-Z was putting forward. And I remember Jay said, "You can't help the poor if you one of them." So I got out and gave back, and so I got rich and went back. That's the win-win. Which some people say, yeah, that's it. At one time, I might have said that was it. But I wonder, how do we best serve our people without capital in the capitalist society? And can you? So that's a question that I have moving forward. So now that we've talked about our black power defined, pro-capitalism on one end, anti-capitalism on the other hand, let's take a journey through history a little bit and talk about kind of what that looks like, and what it looked like for us. Let's see where we at on time. We're looking pretty good through time. Okay. So when I talk about our history, we're going to go from enslavement to Reconstruction, looking at the laws and policies in life that happened through that time, Jim Crow era, um, 1867 through or 1877 to about 1954, World War II in the 40s, civil rights in the 50s and 60s, and that brings us to where we are in the 70s. Take this down here. So, Reconstruction and civil rights, I think, was a very interesting place. Well, even enslavement. Let's start there. So during enslavement, I think the common misnomer is that African Americans, we ain't do nothing, we ain't have nothing, we couldn't be nothing. And to a certain extent, that was true. But there was always it was two things. One, there was always a small free Black community that was able to participate economically. We cannot forget about that. The same way there's a small group of folks who are benefiting a lot from the current system. But then you had an underground system in which enslaved individuals found value in what they did. You might have been bartering, you might have been exchanging. In the movie Sinners, I know it was the 1930s by then, but even in the movie Sinners, a part that I really, really liked was that when Stack and Smoke started the nightclub that they were going to do that night, a brother came in there and he was going to spend some wooden nickels. And one of the brothers like, we ain't taking that shit, we want real money. But that was a form by which folks traded. So okay, this money is in our monetary system, and we participate in economics through those means. So even back during enslavement, people might have been selling, they were buying from each other, they were using other means of currency outside of what the free population was using to still have economic opportunities. They may have been picking a certain amount of cotton during the week, and this much had to go to the folks in charge, but they might have kept a little bit for themselves and built something on the side and sold that off to somebody. Or they might have had a certain amount of something left over and they built a cake and sold the cake, or whatever they did. There was always some kind of economic activity going on among our demographic, whether free or enslaved. When you talk about specifically interacting with the market from a participatory perspective, you definitely want to look at my favorite amendments, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, and the Civil Rights Act of 1866. The 13th Amendment, I talked about it before, and I'll talk about it forever, ended slavery outside of prison. 14th Amendment provided equal protection under the law, as did the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And then the 15th Amendment guaranteed the right to vote. And if you've been looking at the news today, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, not the 15th Amendment, but the Voting Rights Act, which was passed during civil rights, is being up for debate under the Supreme Court. So even as we look at the rights that were given to us then, there's an all-out assault on our ability to navigate the vote. So under the 14th, 15th, 13th, and 14th, and the Civil Rights Act of 1866, that provided us our first foray, I always butcher that word, into economic opportunity or economic participation in the market, in the free market in America. You would see the all out assault, right? You would see land ownership. We were able to own land. We were able to buy and sell land and enter and play in commerce, build institutions, churches, social clubs, families. We became landlords, land owners. We became business owners, shop owners. What was so unique about this time was, there were two kind of classes of post freedmen, I'll call them. Those who were skilled labor, like artisans, barbers, things of that like, and then those who were agricultural scientists. You see how I did that? These weren't just land workers, they were agricultural scientists. These were people who could turn a plot of land into $1 million or whatever you want to call it. And so a lot of them remained in those fields with the ability to just earn wages from those opportunities. And so during Reconstruction, while it was still an assault on our ability to live peacefully, our ability to hold on to the gains that we had, it was the first time where we were in elected office. We were able to participate in economics among ourselves and with the dominant culture, and start to get a part of this American dream and enjoy a part of the capitalism play. So that was a major part that I like to bring during that time. Let's see. I'll move on for the sake of time. I'll drop a link to the economics class. We can go deeper in that conversation. And then when you think about Jim Crow, so when Reconstruction ended basically under an agreement, it was the Tillman-Hayes election of 1877. And basically during Reconstruction, the South was doing all they could to get back into good graces with the country, with the North. The North finally let them back in, and they said, if you give us the presidency, the North will take our hands off the South. And then from there, Jim Crow happened, and was kind of a reversal of what happened during Reconstruction. During this time, you lost all your rights to own land and property. You lost your rights to earn the kind of money you were earning under Jim Crow, under Reconstruction. It was kind of a slavery 2.0. But during that time, you saw the rise in African-American economic, social, and political thought. Three main perspectives took place. And again, this is from the economics of Jim Crow class. Booker T. Washington, who had a perspective. Well, let me take a step back. Booker T. Washington, I can't go there for time. But Booker T. Washington, who founded Tuskegee University, who attended Hampton University. I very rarely am I gonna mention Hampton in anything. I'm a Howard man, so I'm gonna mention Howard. But for this one, he went to Hampton Institute. He bought into the ideology that, you know what, the way you build your political muscle is through your economic means. Continue to be a second class in politics, but build such a tight economic engine that when it's time for politics, you're ready for it. We're gonna get to politics, but first be the best landowner, the best worker you can be. Build such a tight economic system that you build the best shoes, build the best out of the land, raise the best animals. Whatever you've been doing, be so good at that when it's time for politics, you got the economics behind you to be able to navigate that. And so he built on skilled trades, agriculture, and manual labor as the pathway for economic independence, and then later use that industrial education to build your political education. W.E.B. Du Bois, on the other hand, said, that's cool and everything, but I think we got more to give than that. We need to have all of the benefits of those laws passed, and we need to have a political power, economic power, social power, and all of that. So no, we ain't just gonna focus on that. We gonna focus on other things. And he specifically believed in, and later walked away from this perspective of the talented 10th. This part of our community will be responsible for, these are the most talented people who will be the doctors, lawyers, teachers, and they'll go back and they'll be the leaders of the community and build and go with those Booker T. Washingtonites and build up a community so we're all there together. We ain't waiting for it. And then even later, the 1910s, you saw Marcus Garvey come with his Black nationalist perspective, and it's specifically up north, saying we need to do for self, just like Booker T. Washington. We need to have our own, like Booker T. Washington, and we need to look at ourselves not as just formerly enslaved, but connect to the larger diaspora, back to the motherland and through the Caribbean islands to build a base from Africans instead of thinking about each other that way. So during this time, you had a lot of interesting economic thought during that time. Let's see. And also the Negro Business League, which was built by Booker T. Washington. You had Robert Abbott and we'll get to that. Not the attack. We ain't there yet. Okay, I'm going a little bit ahead of myself here. All right. So now we're here to the Great Migration, World War I, and the Harlem Renaissance. So we're talking about from 1900 till about 1920, until not about 1930 in this regard. Now, during this time was a very interesting time. African Americans were moving from the South. Well, let me take a step back. One thing that kind of kicked off the migration was Booker T. Washington's Atlanta Compromise. And in that Atlanta Compromise, he said, basically, we will live in this subservient world, and we'll relinquish our right to vote that we just got, and we'll be your servants. We'll be your labor. As long as we can do that, we'll be fine, and you don't got to worry about us. It was really a sales pitch, and he had more to the story. But Black folks down south was like, hell no, we getting the fuck up out of here, and we headed up north. So Black folks went from down south, headed up north to Chicago, to Detroit, to the West Coast, to New York, to the East Coast, looking for economic opportunity. And looking for this economic opportunity, you were bringing your culture from the South to the North. So you started to see in places like Detroit, Chicago, Pittsburgh, Boston, DC, Virginia, LA, Washington, Seattle, Portland. You started to see African Americans bringing their culture with them. So man, we used to hook up this food like this. Now I can sell me a plate. We used to make music like this. Now I can make music and get paid from it. So you start to see more opportunities in that regard. The Black press started to grow. Black churches started to grow. Black business started to grow. And then you started to see, and I'm moving forward faster, a little bit faster for a reason. World War I, the economic boom, you start to see African Americans serving in the armed forces. Not that we didn't serve in the Revolutionary War, not that we didn't serve in the Civil War, but now an opportunity to do it as a free person. And labor shortages opened industrial jobs, usually closed to blacks, including manufacturing and railroad opportunities. So you're starting to see economic employment starting to grow in these same cities. We're starting to see the Chitlin circuit, and I'm doing that under quotes, build places that are our side of the time, our side of the tracks, where acts would come and participate. So you started to see clubs being built, doctors' offices. You started to see morticians. You start to see the rise of Black Wall Streets, and I'll get into that here in a moment. You start to see barbers and florists and land workers and all of these different capacities. We were looking to make money. Also, even in union membership. So you start to see African-American opportunity as far as economics grow here. And I'm moving faster through this part because this is a part of the Jim Crow class, and I can drop the link so you can get to that information. And then the Harlem Renaissance brought forth an opportunity for our intellectual capital to come to bear. So people who started to write poems and songs. So you saw Langston Hughes. You saw the new Negro mentality saying, we ain't our ancestors. Basically, we trying to get this money. We trying to live free, and we trying to express ourselves. Langston Hughes, Duke Ellington of the likes, cities like Chicago, cities like Harlem, really start to blow with all of this Black business. And then you had underworld business as well. The numbers coup. You had the gangsters. You had dope. You had women. You had the whorehouses. You had gambling, like you saw in Harlem Nights. Things leisure, things that we were finding our ways into. Black banks, the loan shark, the bank, the insurance man, all of the different echelons of society happening in these northern cities and can still continue to happen down south. So this leads me to a conversation around Black Wall Streets. So when we talk about Black Wall Streets, there's some very specific things that we're talking about. We're talking about, a high concentration of, and because of separate but equal, we had at least some autonomy on our side of the tracks, on our side of town. So we're talking about a high concentration of Black-owned businesses, like grocery stores, banks, insurance company, law firms, medical practices, funeral homes, an interconnected economic system. So businesses that serve the needs of the community, with many goods and services being created and consumed internally due to necessity. So you started to build your own economic engine. Well, you can't come here, nigga. Okay, well, fine, we'll build our own. And we got the power and we got the means by which to do it. Job creation. These businesses hired folks. So we're talking about Madam C.J. Walker. We're talking about let's see here, Madam C.J. Walker. We're talking about Annie Malone in the beauty industry, insurance like John Merrick in the Mutual Life insurance company, Maggie Walker, the first woman to lead the bank, St. Luke's. We're talking about SP Sofer, one of the selling personal care items. We're talking about all of these banks and businesses. And I didn't mention, the Freedmen's Bank and the rise of Black banks, but we'll be talking about that here as we move forward. And so also you're talking about the social and the cultural characteristics. So you're talking about cities where you center in social life, like nightclubs, dance halls, restaurants, movie theaters, and hotels, all owned by people in the community. So we didn't have to go to the other side of the tracks to do that. We was doing it with our own, listening to our own acts, our own movies, our own plays, our own restaurants, our own food. It gave us a sense of community and pride. Professional and skilled labor. This was diverse population with diverse entrepreneurs. And so we're talking about places like Greenwood and Tulsa. We're talking about Brownsville and Chicago. We're talking about Sweet Auburn in Atlanta. We're talking about West 9th Street in Little Rock, Arkansas. Ferris Street in Jackson, Mississippi. U Street in DC. West Oakland, California. Jackson Ward in Virginia, where we just were this summer when we were visiting family down in Virginia, we went up to Jackson Ward in Richmond, Virginia, Birmingham, Alabama, Seneca Village, Manhattan. And so we're talking about people, places, and things that were, built. Now, the other side of this conversation that I'm not really big on was, they try to say, well, these places, it was massacres and riots, and they took them down and they did all the stuff. Yeah, well, maybe that was happening. You had government, as we've seen in this class, government okay to do harm to Black communities. So it wasn't like these people was running up in these communities and we was like, oh Lord, I'm so scared. No, we took up arms. We took up a way to defend ourselves and save ourselves. But when you're fighting against a larger system, it's difficult to do so. So I don't talk about how they were manslaughtered and burnt down. I talk about the entrepreneurism, the innovation that built these places, and how we continue to build even after this happened. And again, we're talking about the history of Black business and Black labor in this country. And so you can't have this conversation without a conversation about Blacks and labor unions. So a big part of what we brought to the table, and still to this day, and that's kind of the issue, is around labor. And so we're talking about early exclusion and inclusion into labor unions, most notably, and I'll just for the time's sake, because this was the economics class, around the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. Which A. Philip Randolph organized in 1925, but it wasn't until 1937 where they were actually recognized. But the Porters brought a whole new opportunity for African-American men to make a living, share culture, and become, I'll say worldly, even if it was through the country. Used to be you doing hard labor or you doing skilled labor. Well, this was domestic labor on the train, serving on the train, but it was also an opportunity for you to go to different cities across the country. This is during the Great Migration. So you were able to sell those Black papers from the Chicago Courier to the Pittsburgh Courier to the Chicago Defender, the Courier. You was able to take music. You was able to take fashion. You was able to move around. If you remember the movie Malcolm X, he was on the trains, the ham and cheese. I got coffee, lemon meringue pie. And he wanted to smash it in the man's face. But the porter industry was an example of how unionization was an opportunity as well. We'll see later during civil rights how even when Dr. King lost his life, was at Memphis trying to deal with the sanitation workers and their labor dispute, etc. Even looking into the 1940s, the Supreme Court ruled in 1944 that Black workers could sue for admission into white unions. World War II labor shortages and executive orders 8802 opened up those industry jobs. So as we were coming from the South, bringing our labor and our culture with us and our entrepreneurship, industrial jobs leading to greater union inclusion and into organizations like the CIO. And if you was making it anywhere like the city of Detroit, here union leadership and union approval was up because we were part of the auto industry. And you saw a couple weeks ago when we were talking about the Black Political Convention, how Detroit was like, hold up, y'all, we don't like what you're talking about to a certain extent because it's a union town with union people. In the 1960s, which was a very interesting time in Black business, we were still left out of the mainstream, so we were still building in those cities, still having our own industries, underground and overground, but the labor movement merged with the civil rights movement. And if you saw the call for jobs, wages, etc., that was happening through the civil rights movement. So we're talking about people like Rustin, who organized the March on Washington, Mary McLeod Bethune, who was a union person, etc., etc. Even through the civil rights movement, you saw more economic philosophy. So we talked about Booker T, W.E.B., and we talked about Marcus Garvey. Well, in the 60s, of course, we had more than this, but just for the sake of argument, it was two kind of philosophies here. Malcolm X, Black economic nationalism philosophy, which was more Garvey, more Booker T. To a certain extent, he wasn't trying to be subservient for nobody. And then Dr. King, which was more integrationist economics, where you get what the laws are saying you deserve, and you get access to the larger piece of the pie. And so, we've always had this duality, and I apologize for having Malcolm that small down there. I'll fix that next time. But those dualities continue to exist, as we saw in the 70s around capitalism or anti-capitalism. W.E.B. Du Bois and their perspectives, Dr. King and Malcolm X through their perspective. So there's always this duality around how we see ourselves as a people navigating through our economic plight. So I said a lot. I'm gonna take a quick pause there, and I want to. One thing that I wanted to talk about or give a quick moment to was during this time as well, especially around the 60s. You started to see the African American middle class start to grow because of HBCUs and our ability to become professionals, teachers, dentists, doctors, lawyers, professionals. And so you had this new professional class building. And in this professional class building, you also had entrepreneurs building businesses. One, I'll take example. We already know Berry Gordy and Motown, and we'll get into that. But we'll talk about John H. Johnson, and he built the Johnson Publishing Company. And one of the very unique opportunities that some Black entrepreneurs used with that time was exposing to the larger demographic opportunities to market to and have consumption by this big old Black population that you tried not to have an opportunity with. So when it didn't work, to say you should do it off of the good notion that you're great Americans. Hey, this is a demographic you can tap into. This is a demographic that has spending power and you want to spend to them. So John H. Johnson put out a video in the late 50s or early 60s talking about how to sell to the Negro in this new population. So I'm gonna play a little bit of that as we talk about demand, power, and how we were able to kind of navigate, how some entrepreneurs were able to navigate that part of the conversation as well. Again, we're talking about capitalism, right, baby? All right. So I'm gonna share my screen here. How to sell to the Negro. This is just a portion of the 25-minute video.
What sales psychologists have to say about selling to the Negro.
The secret of selling to the Negro is expressed in one word. That word is recognition. Now, there's nothing unusual about that. People want to be recognized. They need recognition. That's basic in all of us. But perhaps because he's had so little of it, the Negro needs even more. He needs to feel important and appreciated. This need is a very real and important one. It shows up even in many of the Negro's shopping habits. Anyone who sells or wants to sell to the Negro customer should know about some of these habits. 3 habits in particular play a big part in every sales transaction. To begin with, most Negroes buy by brand. They ask for products by name. They're quick to turn down off-brands. Buying by brand, that's the first important Negro buying habit. Now for the second. The Negro buys good quality merchandise. Symbols of quality and prestige are very important to the Negro customer. This woman, for example, is buying fine crystalware. But she is also buying the admiration and approval of her friends and relatives. Listen to her thoughts.
My, isn't it beautiful? I can hardly wait to show it to Sally and Joan.
It's a well-known fact that many Negro customers are influenced by the opinions of others. What their friends may think of a certain item often decides whether or not the sale is made. So remember, the Negro buys quality merchandise. That's the second important point. And here's the third thing to remember when selling to a Negro customer. When he specifically asks for one thing, don't try to sell him something else. Don't try to switch him at the point of sale. If you do, he'll probably react something like this.
Doesn't he think I've got the money to pay for it?
The Negro resents being offered a substitute. He wants to be sold on quality, not price. The Negro buys by brand, he buys quality, and he doesn't like to be switched at point of sale. These are the keys to selling the Negro customer.
According to leading researchers, in proportion to population and income, Negroes buy more quality products than any other comparable United States group.
That's such an interesting kind of, when I watch that, it's in, and I have the link into anybody who's in the list for the class. I'll drop the full link to that there. And I think it's unique in that, we're still sold through our music. I know I was through my years, and the kids are now through designer. And that's basically what they were saying, and that was the thing about capitalism. Like, so a Black entrepreneur cooked this up for brands to say, well, if you want to sell to these folks, this is how you do it. Get them this way, and that way. Whether they can afford it or not, whether it's ethical business, this is what you do. So without prolonging that conversation, that brings us up to where we are in the 70s. So that conversation we had first, it started with the anti or pro capitalism perspective. We looked at it through the Black Power defined, and then we looked at economics through enslavement, through Reconstruction, through Jim Crow, and through civil rights. And so I put 1986, 1968. Let me fix that one real quick. 1968. There we go, 68. So that brings us to where we are as so my contemporary times for this conversation is the 70s. So let's take a quick pivot here and let's talk about a part of civil rights was to fight for equality. So the Civil Rights Act, which barred discrimination in public accommodations. You had the Voting Rights Act, which provided federal oversight, which that's what I was mentioning earlier, which is under attack now, that provided oversight to what was going on in the South and the North under voter oppression for African Americans. And then you had the Fair Housing Act of 1968, right after Dr. King was murdered. So, you know, a part of our class, we've been talking about how people were tired of looking for civil rights and looking to do it a different way. Well, you know, however, people gave their lives and they gave their everything to the system and said, you know what, we ain't giving up on that. Yeah, Dr. King is gone, but we going to get what we worked for, what we set in them buses for, what we did these freedom rides for, what we did these marches for, what we did these protests for. We going to get that. And that's a part of our conversation here in the 70s. So a part of that is under President Johnson. Let me get my deck back up. So under President Johnson, you know, his Great Society programs, and we've talked about this ad nauseum about, you know, was he for the people or not? What did he do? What didn't he do? But one of the things that were interesting is, you know, he moved in a way to try to allow for there to be opportunities for African Americans. You know, he signed all those civil rights bills that I was just talking about. He signed them, but he also did some other things that weren't so rad, so to speak. And so Executive Order 11246 prohibited federal contractors from discriminating, required affirmative action, which President Trump just flipped over in January. It mandated equal opportunity in federal contracting nationwide and kind of birthed the Black subcontractor class that later Black mayors in the 70s helped kind of build the infrastructure for Black contractors at the federal level, especially in construction. And it established the Department of Labor Enforcement through the EFCCP office. He also put forth the Philadelphia Plan. Nixon eventually revised it, but let's take a minute and look at that Philadelphia Plan as we think about affirmative action and we think about how federal government was involved in navigating some of the affirmative action. So affirmative action, in my opinion, was something that was set in place to ensure that though the laws were passed, that people would still have an opportunity to enjoy some of the meat from the law that was passed. We even saw with the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, they had to fight like hell to get those things ratified. And then once they were ratified, they had to fight like hell to keep them on the books. So just because a law passes on the book doesn't mean it's going to happen. So, you know, what Johnson and his administration was trying to do was saying, okay, we want to ensure that to keep these Negroes out the streets and picketing and protesting and rioting, let's give them a little something. Other people said, no, nah, fuck that. Let's give them something else. And we'll talk about what that was. So I'm going to share my screen as we talk about the Philadelphia Plan and how that was an affirmative action policy that opened the floodgates in a good and a bad way moving forward. So let's look at the Philadelphia Plan and a little bit of what it was and how it was revised.
The Philadelphia Plan is really the first fully developed affirmative action program in the entire United States. In Philadelphia, the Johnson administration created a program that would set targets for bringing a certain number of African Americans onto construction projects, roughly proportional to their percentage in the population. The problem is that the Philadelphia Plan in the Johnson administration gets thrown out as illegal, that it's essentially violating the Civil Rights Act's ban on discrimination, ironically enough, in that it's creating certain positions for a specific group. And it more or less gets abandoned for the last few months of the Johnson administration. It's revived, however, by Richard Nixon's new Secretary of Labor, George Shultz. And this is part of a larger strategy that Nixon is trying, depending on how you interpret this, to either win over African American support or, perhaps more convincingly, to fracture the Democratic base. They would employ an African American and put them on a motorcycle and send them down to the next construction site ahead of the inspector coming in. Games like this got played all the time. A lot of back and forth to increase employment, a lot of resistance, and it makes a certain degree of progress. I mean, you can find by the even early 1970s, a significant increase in African American construction employment. But it's something that has all sorts of problems as you try to build it out nationally. And the irony is that it never really fully transforms the construction industry. What it does do is it creates the model of affirmative action that gets picked up in other parts of the business community, that gets picked up in higher education, and becomes a core part of efforts at integration of key institutions across the country.
Yeah, so a part of this discussion is around affirmative action. And I think, I was fortunate enough to live through a time where affirmative action was the law of the land, which led to increased representation in corporate world, in the educational world, which was necessary to remedy the continued structural and de jure and de facto segregation, racism, institutional racism that happens in this country. We can see now with what's going on, it's a need for it. People from certain zip codes aren't given a chance. They aren't given the opportunity to rise the way we think that they should. So, it was a philosophy where the government was willing to say, those who are able to make it that far, those who are good enough, you can. As opposed to it being, nope, this is a white country for whites only, or only white people can do it. And if you say otherwise, you're lying, you're reverse racism. Man, fuck that shit. And so those programs were in place to make this country better, to make people better. And during the 70s, 80s, and 90s, that's exactly what it did. And as we move forward the week after next, we'll look at, what affirmative action looked like in education and what it looked like with the Backey case for education, and what it looked like in the form of school desegregation as well. And so as we move forward in our discussion, as we talk about the Philadelphia plan, like they mentioned in the video, in '69, Nixon required the government contractors to set goals for minority hiring in construction, to target racial discrimination in the building trades, specifically set specific minority goals for federal contracts, and become a model for nationwide affirmative action implementation. Now, a part of this wasn't because of the goodwill of old Tricky Dick Nixon himself, but because he wanted to push this idea of Black capitalism. So, we talked about how during this discussion, Black capitalism has been used. It was a ideology used to undermine African American liberation forces. So at one point, civil rights was saying, it's the government's job to make this right. Y'all had all these years in slavery, all these years of Jim Crow, all these things you guys have done to stop us from doing it. Y'all got to make it right. We need voting rights protection. We need protection to make sure we can go on places, integrate places. We need this protection because y'all did it and y'all need to undo it. So the burden is on y'all to make it right. So we're going to picket, march, protest, take dogs, take hoses, take issues to court, get laws passed. So you guys live up to what this Constitution says, it should do. Well, like you mentioned in the video, the black nationalism or the black capitalism did two things. It made those looking for government intervention to think about it. Well, we did it forever. It didn't really work. We want to run our own businesses. This is what we want. We don't want government intervention. We just need it so we can do what we have to do. So when we build our cities, they won't get burned down. So when we build our companies, they won't get acquired. So when we do our things, you won't have the mighty hand of the government using COINTELPRO, using FBI and CIA to undermine us. So we need some of this stuff. And so, it was a big, I don't say fight. It was a big debate within the Black liberation movement. Should we do this? Should we not? Could it happen? We saw the brother talking about it earlier in the video. And to make a long story short, it was an opportunity to undermine the Democrats to say, hey, we get your support, and to try to take Black liberation and put it in your hands. So we're not gonna fund you, we're not gonna let you compete, but we'll just say Black nationalism, black capitalism, and Black excellence, just so you feel good. And the 1 out of a million that make it, then fine, you make it. Now our hands is off. Government ain't got to do it. We put the business in y'all hand, and if you don't do it, you're lazy, you're poor, you ain't nothing. But we ain't got to do it. Y'all can do it. A lot of what we hear today, right? We'll get back to the Nixon's Office of Minority Business Enterprise as we move forward too. So this Black capitalism philosophy hit well with those who were able to buy into the system. Wilt Chamberlain, James Brown, I'm Black and I'm proud, James Brown. Promoted capitalism as a response to urban unrest and civil rights demands for economic justice. It aimed to redirect the burden of restorative justice practices from the government to private businesses while maintaining Republican support. So the government ain't got to do it. We give you a chance to start a business. If you can't start a business, 1 in 3 businesses fail. But if you can't start no business, then that's on you. Government ain't got to do it. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. While everybody else is getting government subsidy, everybody getting government contracts, everybody getting government oversight. But y'all, no, it's a business. Business to do it for y'all. And it was a cultural endorsement and symbolism. James Brown's support for the Nixon capitalism represented celebrity endorsement of entrepreneur approach to Black liberation. James Brown, say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud, embodied cultural nationalism that aligned with economic self-determination and messaging. But the only problem in that and all of that was it was just rhetoric. It was talk. Black capitalism, but how do you do that without capital, without TA, technical assistance? How do you do it without market setting? How do you do it without the oversight? And how do you compete with businesses that have been doing this for a very long time? So it was kind of double speak in that regard. But as you talk about some of the bad, let's talk about some of the good here. The Office of Minority Business Enterprises was established in 1969 through Executive Order 11458, recognizing the need for federal agency to focus on supporting minority business. This was a response to the inner city riots and a promise of a piece of the action in policy. In 1971, Nixon issued Executive Order 11625, which expanded the scope of the Office of Minority Business Enterprises operations and directed federal agencies to develop a minority business enterprise contracting program. And this was some of those opportunities that Earl Graves was talking about earlier. 1979, the Carter administration recognized the OMBE and renamed it the Minority Business Development Agency. And that was during the Carter administration. And then in 79, measures were taken in the Carter administration with President Carter. We'll get to him at the end of the class as well. From 77 to 79 to improve technical training and facilitate loans for Afro-American businesses, in particular the SBA 8A set-aside program that led to businesses, to Black businesses, to Black businesses' biggest period of growth. A fixed percentage of government contracts allocated to minority firms and was mandated at all levels from federal to local agencies, a measure that tripled government businesses and Black firms from 1 to 2.7 billion by 1980. And then at the same time as well, there were corporate strides. Some of this affirmative action worked through the corporate realm. And part of how it happened, it was through Black mayors and affirmative action. And we talked about this when we talked about the rise of Black mayors a few weeks ago. So people like Maynard Jackson, Coleman Young, Tom Bradley, Marion Barry. And now his was more 80s, but our class go to 80s, so we throw them in. Maynard Jackson was the first Black mayor of a southern city in Atlanta, implemented aggressive minority contracting requirements, especially around the city airport. So, the birth of the Black upper middle class and high class businesses were born there. Coleman Young in Detroit used mayoral power to direct city contracts toward Black-owned business firms and minority contractors, established Detroit's minority business development programs, linking municipal purchasing power to economic development and improvement. Tom Bradley in LA created pathways for Black entrepreneurs and municipal services by building coalitions across racial lines. And then Marion Barry, you already know Marion Barry, the good and the bad, implemented set-aside programs ensuring minority businesses participated in district government projects and activities, used mayoral authority to create economic opportunities, and benefited Black communities in the nation's capital. So all those chocolate cities weren't just because Black folks was there. It was because, economic power was being moved through affirmative action and through the vote and through economics as well. Because it wasn't like these firms was getting this power and not being able to use it. They was able to use it as well and navigate and leverage. So strides in corporate America. Some of this data up here, I think, is not for this era. I think it's more for the 90s and the 80s and 90s. But C-suite breakthrough, limited but significant progress at the top executive positions. Leaders like Keith Kinshaw at American Express. Yeah, that's later. Corporate board inclusion and systematic challenges still remain. Despite affirmative action, structural barriers continue to limit Black investment at the highest levels of corporate. Glass ceilings in place. Mentorship and sponsorship networks were predominantly white and non-exclusive. Education and societal gaps still proceeded. So there were strides made from zero, but it was still a difficult kind of navigation, as they move forward. So now that we've talked about all of these things, let's kind of recenter in economic ideologies of the Black Power movement. Again, we saw capitalism, Black business at the center of it, which we saw in Black Wall Streets and segregated cities. Capitalism was never scary for us. It's something we enjoyed. It's something we loved. It's something that we did in association with labor as well. Being able to get up and go to job as a janitor, as a lawyer, as a doctor, as a food manufacturer, as a restaurateur, nightclub owner, you name it. That never was a problem for us. It was just always kind of an issue, but we didn't want to see the tokenism. We didn't want to see, leaving it up to business with no oversight when we know how the corporate world could be. Alternative economic models were always set in play in the Black power era because people were disenchanted with capitalism. Some were, but you still had, think about during the Black Arts movement, we talked about the Third World Press here in Detroit. That was the largest producer of poetry recorded and published in the country. We talked about in Chicago the same. We talked about all these things. So economics were never a problem for us. Berry Gordy and Motown, and we'll talk about that later. But socialism, African-centered economics, communism, all those other isms were set in play to say, you know what? I don't trust that they'll be fair if we do that. And we want to take care. There's so many hurts and so much damage in our community. 1 millionaire, 2 millionaires ain't gonna do it because they had to subscribe to a whole nother philosophy, and they may not care as much about the people. And the political power still ain't with the people. So yeah, you got a couple millionaires, cool. But what political power do you have to impact your community? And that's the question we've been asked today, which I think is fair and unfair. Our country has a way of making, well, let me say this way. Labor and talent has never been a problem for our community. Even if we look at where African Americans have been able to strive in and of themselves, in entertainment, for example, in athletics, as an example. What other demographic of people will take a 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old kid and give them tens and 20 of millions of dollars and expect for them to have the perspective to be able to use that money right? like Umar would say, ain't that suspicious? I got a 19-year-old kid that can shoot a basketball, or that can catch a football, or that can throw a football, or that can sing a song, maybe not even much on music anymore, you know, the music industry is down, but that can do those things, or a kid who can play a sport in college, which I believe they still should get their money, but you're giving it to somebody who may not have the perspective, the experience to be able to do with that money what needs to be done, not just for them, but for the larger community. So, I mean, you know, you think about it that way. But then when the tech CEO come with $1 billion idea, you don't want to give him no funding. You might want to bring him in to work for you, but you don't want to give him the funding, but you can catch a ball, you can get to $20 million. So you got to think about, you know, those kind of things as well as you move forward. So let's take a profile of what the Black community looked like economically during that time. So again, we're talking about, you still got publishers, you got Panthers selling books, you got speaking engagements, you got ownership models, the Nation of Islam, all these kind of things, and then you got labor. So you're talking about opportunities, and this is how it was during you know, the Black Wall Streets as well. Grocery stores, bakeries, hardware stores provided essential goods and supplies to the community. Now you can go over to the other one, but do you want to? Automotive repair, mechanics serving transportation needs of working families, bookstores, theaters, meeting spaces focused on culture and community engagement, especially around the Black Power movement, and, you know, some of the civil rights stuff. Beauty shops, barber shops serving as information centers and gathering spaces, law firms, medical offices, newspapers providing essential professional services to the communities, dry cleaners, that's what George Washington owned, seamstresses, repair services, serving the needs of the community, doctors, lawyers, etc. But then you had your Black business titans of the era. Berry Gordy and Motown, entertainment company, media company that grew in the 60s and grew to be a dominant force in movies and in TV in the 70s. Johnson Publishing, what we talked about, Ebony Jet magazine, which showed Black culture at a totally different level, one that was defined, one that was luxurious, one that allowed for media to build. And he had one of the biggest companies in the country. You had Don Cornelius and Soul Train. And we'll talk about him more, and Berry Gordy more specifically as we talk about music later on in the conversation, but build an empire off of Black music, Black fashion, Black image, and Black business. You also had the Johnson Publishing Company, or Johnson Products Company, started by George E. Johnson, a major Black-owned cosmetic and hair care company, Afro Sheen and the like, during the Black Pride movement, which would air during Soul Train. So Soul Train not only was a music venture and a TV venture, but it allowed for Black brands to advertise to get their products around the country. And we'll talk about that next time. A.G. Gaston, another old school who built his Birmingham empire around hotels, around real estate, radio, funeral homes, and brought a different respectability to Black entrepreneurship in the South. And I'll drop all these people's autobiography in our follow-up notes as well. So let's take a moment to kind of settle in here, or kind of have some final thoughts. Black business titans, and out here. Let me remove this from the screen. So I think more than anything else in this hour and a half that we've had, and a little bit less than that because we had a little bit of technical difficulties, and then we had the 5 minutes at the start where the video plays. Wait, we're not defining Black power. Where is that? Why are we running that? There we go. You know, I think that, you know, even more than any other time, understanding and analyzing what our ancestors were able to do and navigate through during that time is very important. I think that when we think about the economics of Black power, we're thinking about a lot of different things. You know, the right to choose your future, entrepreneurship, joining the workforce, hiring, having the power that comes along with that. That's very important. But I also think thinking about Black labor in and of itself is a question that we have to think about, especially as today We look at the rise of technology, the rise of AI, the contraction of our economy. We are going to be able to we're going to have to make some very tough decisions moving forward. Some of the comfort that we're used to having, getting up and going to your job or running your business or doing whatever you're doing, those opportunities may not be as robust moving forward. So how can we learn from our ancestors who were able to navigate these times in slavery, in Jim Crow, during civil rights, during Black Power, during the affirmative action 80s, during the big 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and now we're in the 2020s. How can we learn from them? How can we navigate? How can we connect? How can we ensure that our business isn't so mimicking the power structure to where I need my millions and that's it. Get my millions and nobody's gonna have nothing. I'm sitting on here condescending you, telling you this, telling you that you can build it by yourself. No, how can we bring our economics to still be centered in making that dollar, but doing it in a way that's cooperative to where we can come up as a people, instead of just look at the $1 million over there, look at the dope man, look at the entrepreneurs, look at the podcasters, look at the streamers, in a way to make it a lot more collective to where we can ensure that if anything were to happen, we do have some allies in the fight and we can take on the system if we need to, given the things that are happening as we move forward. So that's it as far as that. I want to talk about a couple logistics things moving forward just around the end of this class. So we have 2 more courses left, or 2 more conversations left. One is a conversation where we'll look at a little more affirmative action as far as what happened in school desegregation and around education. We'll wrap up our stories around the Black Panthers, the Black Arts Movement, et cetera, and look at what happened in the final years of the Panthers, especially around Elaine Brown becoming the chairman of the organization, the food for kids and the social programs or the survival programs really taking their place, and then the ultimate kind of ending of the Black Panthers as they're going close to the 80s. We look at the church committee and how they Senator Church came together to expose what COINTELPRO was doing, putting the final nail in the coffin on COINTELPRO and how they undermined Black liberation. That's the final class, and then next week we'll talk about Black music, or one of the 2. We'll see. I may change it depending on how I feel. And then Black music. One thing that we didn't get a chance to talk about outside of a very few kind of key pieces is how Black music in the 70s transitioned from soul to funk, and how that transition represented a big FU to the system and built a new sound built on us, for us, by us. So we got 2 more left. You may be getting an early class on Wednesday this week as my schedule is changing, and then we'll end it with our final one, but you'll know when it's coming. I'll definitely let you know. This has been a hell of a ride. I enjoyed this conversation today. I'm interested in continuing this forward. You'll get an email from me, those who are on my list, with the notes from this class, with all the links to all the good information that you're looking to get from me, and then we'll move forward in the process. I just want you guys to know that I appreciate each and every one of you that sat here through this class. I appreciate the information more than anything else. This information has to live. We talked about the Voting Rights Act, and that's under assault. We talked about Black business, and that's under assault. The underfunding of Black labor and how that's impacting our society today. So these are issues that we are still dealing with today, and we have to keep it top of our mind. And I think more than anything else, we have to continue to know this happened in the past and they were able to navigate it, and we can do the same. I look forward to seeing you the next time I see you. This is AAS 477, Black Power Week 8, Economics of Black Power. We out, and we'll see you next time. Peace.